Welcome to the launch of the Education for All Global Monitoring Reports 2013 and 2014 here in Africa's capital, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. My name is Chairman Oba, and I am a youth advocate for the United Nations Secretary General's Global Education First Initiative. I am particularly honored to be here today and welcoming you to this occasion because what we're about to talk about is an issue that is particularly very close to my heart. In many ways, the issues that we'll be discussing that are highlighted in this report represent the story of my own life. They highlight the journey that I have made myself from my native Sierra Leone, where I was born in the slums of Freetown, and my childhood was interrupted by a vicious civil war that oftentimes was characterized by me being a refugee or a displaced, going to school in overcrowded places, having sometimes no teachers at all, or even when we had teachers, there were at least 100 and 120 of us in some of our classrooms. I've always talked about the fact that it's been an incredible lucky break and an area of opportunities that has brought me to where I am today. But when I reflect on it actually, my lucky break is that I was born to two teacher parents who between them have taught for over 50 years. And they instilled in me not only the power of education, but they also made me understand that the only way out of poverty and hopelessness was that undeniable power and light that education brings to me. And that's the journey that is made possible, the reality that I am the first person in my family to have graduated with a university degree, a master's degree for that matter, and I am a passionate advocate for education because the opportunities that were presented to me, I believe, should be presented to every child, and particularly every girl and every child in disadvantaged situations around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, over the course of today's occasion, you will be inspired by a lot of amazing stories and hear about the progress that the world continues to make on education, and also some of the challenges that we continue to face. So I invite you to please sit down, turn off your mobile phones if you have them on, and pay close attention to the distinguished array of speakers that we have here today. It is my singular honor to invite as our first guest somebody who is himself no stranger to education. He's been the champion and the architect of some of the very impressive strides that this country, Ethiopia, has made in terms of educational attainment. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellency, the Right Honorable Demeke Mekonnen, Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Honorable, please.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to host the launch of the Education for All Global Monitoring Report, the world's authoritative survey of education progress. Here in Ethiopia, we have reasons to be very proud of the progress we have made in education over the past decades. As this report demonstrates, in 1999, just 37% of our children were going to primary school. Thanks to our government, thanks to our people and development partners, now 87% of our kids are going to school. This is one of the fastest increase in the world. We still have a long way to go, but thanks to this expansion of primary school, the share of our young people who are literate has also increased. I am proud to announce today that Ethiopia aims to show its continued commitment to education through our announcement of becoming a champion country for the United Nations Secretary General's Global Education First Initiative. The global initiative
that was launched by the UN Secretary General 2 years ago aims to give a big push to the global movement for education by 2015 and beyond. It is vital that we work together to make education for all a reality. On the international scale, today's new important report conveys somber news. Worldwide, 250 million children are not learning to read, write, and count, whether they are in school or not. For many, their education is of such poor quality that are not learning the basics, even if they have spent 4 years in school. It is often claimed that getting more children to school inevitably means lowering the quality of education. But the report shows that it is possible to increase access to education while also making sure that children actually learn when they are in school. The most striking evidence comes from the very region that is often seen as lagging behind our region, the sub-Saharan Africa, including, of course, Ethiopia. In the United Republic of Tanzania, between 2000 and 2007, the proportion of children who completed primary school rose at the same time as the proportion learning the basics also increased. This is equivalent to around 1.5 million extra children learning the basics in the country. Here in Ethiopia, our success in rapidly expanding equitable access to free education has been enabled through a sustained government-led effort to reduce poverty and expand the public education system by creating an effective balance between supply-side policies, such as the contribution of the construction of schools in remote areas, and complementary policies such as abolishing school fees to stimulate demand. This has been backed by a substantial increase in national education expenditure to the sector, which doubled between 2000 and 2010 to 25% of the government budget, one of the largest proportions in the world, as well as improved planning and implementation capacity at all levels. The shift to greater regional and local autonomy has also helped increase community participation and led to more widespread popular recognition of the importance of education for boys and girls, which have also had a key role in expanding access to education across the country in every short time. In order for children to benefit fully from education's incredible power to transform lives, all of us in sub-Saharan Africa need to concentrate on the further steps that will improve education quality at the same time as we are getting more children into school. Above all, that means improving the quality of our teaching, especially for the disadvantaged, as the report demonstrates. We need to make sure that measures to recruit, train, and deploy and retain teachers are designed to give disadvantaged children the same chance as other children. New recruits must reflect the diversity of the children they are going to teach, for example. Sometimes that means recruiting more female teachers. Teachers should be allocated to areas serving disadvantaged children, such as remote and rural areas. Incentives such as housing or allowance can help draw good teachers to such areas. Incentives are also needed to retain the best teachers in the profession, including an attractive career path that offers opportunities for promotion. In the end, an education system is only as good as its teachers. That is why we need to give them every bit of support that we can. In Ethiopia, although we still have a long way to go, we have also made huge progress in a very short time. The movement to get more children into school is unstoppable. Now, our big challenge is to give those children the best teaching possible. As part of our commitment to becoming a champion country for the Global Education First initiative, In 2014, we'll be hosting a policy forum to address strategies for strengthening teacher training institutions in Africa. The report that we are launching today will be an invaluable resource for this forum. We know which road to take, so let's take it together for the sake of this generation and the generations to come. I thank you.
May I ask the Right Honorable Demeke to also now officially launch the GMR report 2013-2014 as is presented to him by Honorable Getachew. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those powerful words. And let me take this opportunity to as well congratulate Ethiopia for just announcing this second that they are a champion country for the Global Education First Initiative. I think we should all applaud When the Global Education First Initiative was launched last year, an African country, a small one, stepped up to also be a champion country. We're honored today to have with us the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Benin, the Honorable Nasiru Bako Arifari, who will now address us. Honorable, please.
Monsieur le directeur général adjoint de l'UNESCO, Monsieur le commissaire représentant la présidente de la Commission de l'Union africaine,
the Commissioner representing the Chair Lady of the African Union Commission, ladies and gentlemen, I am here as the spokesman of President Boni Yayi of Benin, who, for reasons of state, could not come and asked me to present this message as a direct quote. I quote, I am extremely honored, and through me the entire nation of Benin, for your invitation to join you and to speak to the world in at the moment when we are launching officially the Global Monitoring Report on Education for All. We, at the outset of the movement of Education for All, launched a national education development plan. In 2007, your organization invited us to join in the meeting held in Dakar, and our Minister for Development made a speech there. From 2006 to 2010, we were a member of the International Consultative Group entrusted with the preparation of the report and for hosting the high-level meeting. The Assistant Director General of UNESCO, Benin is a full partner in this initiative, which we were one of the first to join and led us to make a tremendous effort in the field of education. The Education for All campaign is a campaign to ensure equitable education for all children, protecting the rights of all children to education, and it is one of the Millennium Development Goals. Benin is a champion country of education for all and tirelessly works on the international for the Millennium Goals in education for 2015 be fully achieved, and that education have an important part in the post-2015 development goals. Ladies and gentlemen, through education for all, we wish to ensure that all our children have access to quality education, including vulnerable groups, promotion of sexual equality, gender equality, especially at primary and secondary levels. And the quality education is just the extension of education for all. And the government and the country of Benin is fully committed to these goals. The African countries, especially sub-Saharan countries, since the outset have made considerable progress, as noted at the time of the first report in the year 2000, each country to the measure of the resources at its disposal. The progress achieved is not perhaps all that we want, especially as the Horizon 2015 approaches, but we must thank the international community for its considerable contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, Benin is one of those countries that has been considered to be extraordinary in the 2010 report, especially as regards universal access to secondary education. The objective education for all has led our country to make a special efforts and sacrifices, especially regarding primary and secondary education and teacher training. Nor did we neglect the vulnerable groups, especially girls and the most remote areas. From 2006 to 2013, the rate of primary school attendance went from 80 to 97.4%, whereas at secondary level, the number of children in attendance more than doubled, going from 300,000 to 750,000 pupils. The gender parity index also increased, going from 96.96 to 94 to 90.96 at primary level, and similarly at secondary level. This required a special effort, and the resources given by my government to the educational sector, which is 16.5% of the budget of 2006, now in 2013 was 27%. 31% of current expenses in servicing the debt have been allocated to education. Similarly, 53% of educational resources are given to primary resources, which is in line with recommendations. The success is due to channeling finances to expanding premises, teacher training, and ensuring proximity of educational establishments. allow me to emphasize those activities which particularly contributed to expansion of education in Benin. First of all, primary schooling is free, and this costs 2 billion CFA francs, about $4 million, I think. Especially partial exoneration also for girls in occupational education. So children, particularly underprivileged, are completely exonerated from school fees. That they are now number more than 1,500 throughout the educational system. The compulsory nature of free university primary education led the government to establish more than 1,500 nursery schools, more than 2,000 primary schools, and 4,000 secondary schools and occupational training establishments. We have also built in existing schools more than 2,000 laboratories and internet computer rooms with computers. We've improved the toilet facilities and water supply. We have also taken particular care in respecting the environment. We have retrained many teachers. We have purged teachers not properly trained and have sent them for retraining. Now only properly trained and qualified teachers are employed. 12,356 secondary school teachers and occupational training instructors have been recruited. We try to improve their salaries by increasing the basis on the calculation of which wages are calculated. And especially we have provided allowance for those who are the least privileged or working in the least privileged areas. The general improvement of primary school education has also been undertaken at secondary level by increasing the number of school inspectors and the purchase of a number of vehicles to ensure proper inspection, school inspection. The Beninois administration is making as efficient a use it can of the resources available, and we are putting in place a budget that is as optimal and efficient a use of public funds as possible. In spite of all the efforts made, the progress made reveals other improvements possible. Much remains in the field of quality and teacher training. Apprenticeships would require a much greater effort to develop the number of apprenticeships available and apprentices who finish their apprenticeship. About 42% of our teachers of our secondary school pupils achieve the mid-secondary education certificate, and about 30% pass their baccalaureate. We want to lengthen basic education from 6 to 10 years, which would require considerable more investment if we want to get 90% of our students who pass the baccalaureate by the year 2020. The education also has an informal sector, and we've tried to help those children in informal apprenticeships of the traditional type, and introduce a system whereby informal apprenticeship can be qualified officially. To date, more than 200 crafts have been inventoried. The challenge of occupational training are increasing the number of apprenticeships and extending it throughout the country. To mark the break away from classical education, which is only producing unemployed, has led us to develop entrepreneurial skills. 2 training centers for entrepreneurs, which presently have 30 students from the technical training colleges. To reposition our educational system in this regard, we are planning to hold a second countrywide forum on the educational sector. Among the underprivileged in Benin, we have the various handicapped children. Apart from official centers, the private sector and partners in development also make efforts. We have to progress quickly in developing inclusive education, not only to adapt ergonomically the structures, the premises in conventional premises, but especially train teachers and instructors so that there can be personal contact in aiding these children to have a fruitful, productive life. We want to open the doors of success for all our youth, and no sacrifice is too great in the case of education, where in a world where loss of moral values and incivility seems to be gaining ground, which is why we will spare no effort in our own country. But the world today is a global world, and all the children on earth belong to us all. If we can only put to rest all those places where there is unrest, we must ensure education for all. and peace is the way to achieve it. I thank you very much for having given me the chance to speak of the educational progress made in our country, which certainly is a reflection of the progress achieved as much as of the progress that remains to be achieved in all our countries. I thank UNESCO. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Our next special guest, ladies and gentlemen, is no stranger to our context. He's the Director General of UNESCO. He was born and actually raised here in Addis Ababa. And I know that he's a personal inspiration to me and to many other young people, because he's demonstrated not only what education can do, but he has a strong passion for promoting education around the world. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Getachew Ndignia, Deputy Director General of UNESCO.
His Excellency Ato Demeke Mekonnen, Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency Mr. Nasiru Bako Fariri, Foreign Minister of the Republic of Benin, His Excellency Ato Shferraw Shigute, Minister of Education of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Ms. Amina Mohammed, a Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on post-2015 development planning, His Excellency Dr. Mustafa Siddiqui Kaloko, Commissioner of Social Affairs at the African Union Commission, Ms. Mariam Kaleki, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends. On behalf of the Director General of UNESCO, Mrs. Irina Bokova, I am deeply honored to be here for the global launch of the UNESCO's 11th Education for All Global Monitoring Report, which is being simultaneously launched in other regions of the world. Let me start by thanking the government of Ethiopia and by highlighting the progress Ethiopia has made towards the global education targets. I can testify personally that Ethiopia has transformed beyond recognition, and this transformation is still underway, and there is a long way to go. Between 2006 and 2011, Ethiopia reduced its out-of-school population by 2.2 million. This powerful results reflects a strong political will, and indeed between 2000 and 2010, Ethiopia more than doubled the budget for education, and the government has pushed forward deep reform. It is a pleasure to pay tribute today, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, to these achievements and the government's commitment to tackling the challenges that remain of equity and quality. In this regard, we welcome Ethiopia's decision to become a champion country for the United Nations Secretary General's Global Education First initiative. I take also this opportunity to thank, through you, Mr. Foreign Minister, to His Excellency Mr. Boni Ai, President of the Republic of Benin, for his country's leadership and his personal commitment to putting education first, including as a champion country. In this respect, it is a pleasure also to welcome the decisions of the United States of America to become a champion country of the Global Education First initiative. This is another important step to put education at the top of the global agenda. This is essential because in this new age of limits, every country must invest far more in its greatest renewable energy, and that is its human ingenuity. And this must start on the bench of schools through inclusive quality education. The UNESCO Global Monitoring Report highlights progress across the world since 2000, but it reveals also that we face a global learning crisis. 250 million children are not acquiring basic skills, even after years in school. In sub-Saharan Africa, 40% of young people have had so little, such low quality education, they are unable to read a sentence. Girls and women are the hardest hit. Discrimination is being exacerbated by this crisis. More fortunate children are taught by teachers with the best training and resources, while the most disadvantaged and the weakest teachers get the weakest teachers with least support. The crisis is costing around $129 billion annually and leaving 1/4 of young people in low and lower middle income countries unable to read. Quality education is a fundamental human right for every girl and boy, regardless of background. For years, governments have worked on getting children into classrooms. Now we must concentrate on the quality of what they learn when they are there. And this means focusing on teachers. Teachers are essential for promoting human rights, for nurturing engaged citizens, for creating the conditions to eliminate poverty and build sustainable development. Only by attracting the best teachers, by improving training, by ensuring they teach where needed and are motivated to remain in service, only by doing all this can we break the back of this challenge. Our message today is we can overcome this crisis, but this calls for will and determination and action. This conviction underpins UNESCO's partnership with Education International through the Unite for Quality Education campaign. It guides UNESCO's work to build national capacities for strategic planning and to support teacher training in institutions. And it makes good sense for the UNESCO International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, which is headquartered here in my hometown, Addis Ababa, with the support of the Ethiopian government, for which we are most grateful. With China, UNESCO has launched a major project enhancing teacher education for bridging the quality gap in Africa, starting in 8 countries, including Ethiopia, with a strong ICT component. Thanks to the Global Partnership for Education, UNESCO and Education International are supporting the participation of teachers, organizations in education policy, focusing on 10 countries around the world. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, il faut agir et ce rapport mondial appelle à une action forte.
And this report, global report, calls for strong action. Firstly, governments must recruit teachers of various expertise to cover the diversity of pupils in class. In Afghanistan, for example, have committed themselves to increase the number of lady teachers by 50% this year to try and fill the gap between reduce the gap between boys and girls. We must help also teachers to acquire the skills necessary to cover disadvantaged children. In Mali, for example, in Malawi, training gives new teachers experience of working with disadvantaged children. Third, teachers must be given incentives to teach in remote and undeserved schools. In the Republic of Korea, stipends and promotion opportunities for experienced teachers provide disadvantaged populations with access to quality learning. In addition, the best teachers should have incentives to remain in the profession through attractive career paths, secure contracts, and fair pay. Most of all, governments must recognize that good teachers need a good education system with inclusive curricula that move at the right pace with effective classroom assessment tools to support those students who need it most.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends, despite sustained efforts by many countries, basic education remains underfunded by some 26 billion a year, and international aid is declining precisely when country needs it most in the push towards 2015 goals. Unless we act now, the learning crisis could last for generations. Action is essential for reaching education for all by 2015, and many countries will still fall short, and it must stand at the heart of the new global sustainable development agenda we set to follow. These are the stakes, ladies and gentlemen. We must meet them together, and I'm convinced that we can. I thank you very, very much, but I'm Jigama Sagnalo.
I think I should also say that Prime Minister Aguinaldo runs to the country. We now turn to the person who has been the driving force behind these reports together with our team. They've done a terrific job over the past year putting together this compelling debate about the state of the world's education. She is herself a teacher, an education champion, and a very passionate person for creating a world that will give the right to education to every child around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Madame Igbo.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it really is my great pleasure to be here in Addis Ababa for the global launch of our Education for All Global Monitoring Report. On behalf of the whole of our team back in Paris, we've all been really excited about holding the launch here in Ethiopia, which is such a champion country for education. I actually spent a year in Ethiopia in the mid-90s, so I have also witnessed the great changes over time, and one can see what has happened with the great political will that is evident. The report tracks progress towards the 6 Education for All goals that were set in Dakar in the year 2000. These goals were set to be met by 2015, just 2 years from now. This year's report assesses whether we can expect to meet these goals and the lessons for setting of goals after 2015. It also provides a detailed assessment of progress towards the 6th Education for All goal on the quality of education, and in particular on the key role of teachers in ensuring the quality of education. Based on a detailed review of evidence from around the world that you'll find in the reports in front of you, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to present the whole 400 pages, so do take away the copies and read them hopefully. It presents recommendations on how to overcome the global learning crisis that we are currently facing. The reason for the global launch taking place here in Ethiopia is that it is a country that has shown such great progress, as we've been hearing, and offers hope for what can be achieved for other countries, including for the most disadvantaged. This year's report has, one step back, too far. This year's report has 5 key messages that I'll be outlining in the presentation. The first is that, unfortunately, despite progress that has been made, by 2015, many countries will still not have reached the Education for All goals. This is in part also creating a global learning crisis that is hitting the disadvantaged the hardest. This really is showing us that we really need to step up to the mark in investing in good quality teachers, because a good quality education is only as good as its teachers. The report also shows that we need to not only address unfinished business towards the 2015 goals, but actually start the impetus towards what we need to do after 2015. and in particular that after 2015 we need to track the progress of the most marginalised. In addition, given that one of the failures over the past decade has been lack of finance, in particular lack of aid finance, we are calling for goals after 2015 to include goals on finance. One of the clearest indications of whether we have made progress towards education for all is whether or not children are in school. The report finds that great progress has been made over the past decade. The number of children who are out of school has declined, almost halved. However, progress has been slow in the second part of the decade, meaning that it's now highly unlikely that we're going to get all children into school by 2015. We still have 57 million children out of school. An important reason for this is the failure to reach the marginalised, those living in poverty, in remote areas, and girls in particular, and children with disabilities. Yet of even greater concern, perhaps, is that the number of adolescents of lower secondary school age who are out of school has declined even more slowly, with hardly any change in recent years. And in fact, there has been no change in the number of adolescents out of school in sub-Saharan Africa, as population growth has not kept pace with enrolment growth. Since there's a lot of discussion at the moment about universal lower secondary education potentially being part of goals after 2015, this means we actually need to do a lot more if we're going to meet this challenge. This year's report also identifies how many countries are likely to achieve education for all goals by 2015, which is very close. This graph shows that many countries will not reach the targets by the deadline. So the part in green is showing the proportion of countries that are expected to meet each of the goals. So for example, the second education for all goal on primary schooling, we can see it's 56%, just half of countries will meet this goal. Of even greater concern is adult literacy. Only 29% of countries will ensure that all their adults are illiterate. This is obviously much too far away, and we've got far more to do, not only to make sure all children are in school and learning, but also providing opportunities to young people and adults who have not had that chance. And we must reverse this situation for future generations. If we are to reverse this situation, we need to act urgently. If we continue business as usual, we can see that the poorest girls in the lower part of the racetrack here will remain far behind. In low-income countries, for example, poor girls only spend 3 years in school, while rich boys spend 9 years. So given that rich boys are spending 9 years, it shows that you can actually spend that long in school. On current trends, the poorest girls will only catch up with the richest boys to complete primary schooling by 2086. This is quite shocking, I think, and far from what we're expecting to achieve by our 2015 goals or our 2030 goals. However, it should not be something that leads us to complacency, but actually leads us to act, and act fast. A key factor that has held back progress towards the achievement of goals is the lack of finance. The report calculates that there's currently a financing gap of $26 billion per year for basic education. Even though domestic resources have increased in recent years, and in particular in poor countries, as we were hearing both in relation to Ethiopia and Benin, these countries often also need aid to support them in their efforts to make sure all children are in school and learning. However, aid to basic education has actually declined, and declined for the first time between 2010 and 2011. Low-income countries have been particularly hard hit, and they only receive $1.9 billion in aid, a third of the aid to basic education, while these are the countries that need it the most. This is why the report is calling on a financing goal for after 2015 to make sure it's not only governments that are stepping up to the mark, but also all partners to make sure that there is sufficient finance for education. The focus of this year's report is on the quality of education, showing the global learning crisis and what needs to be done about it, in particular the need to invest in good quality teachers to overcome this crisis. The report shows that the global learning crisis is hitting the disadvantaged the hardest. 250 million children are not learning the basics, as we have heard, and this is equivalent to around 38% of all children of primary school age. Of 130 million of these children have actually spent at least 4 years in school. So these children are in school, sitting at their desks or on the floor, but not learning. The majority of these children live in poor countries and come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Often unable to read a simple sentence, they often drop out of school early. There's a vast divide between regions in where you live as to whether you're going to learn the basics. In North America and Western Europe, almost all children do so. However, in South and West Asia, only around 1/3 do, and here in Sub-Saharan Africa, only around 1/2. These two regions, in fact, account for more than 3/4 of those not crossing the minimum learning threshold. Here in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's around 80 million children who are not learning the basics, and I think that's equivalent to, or similar to, the population here in Ethiopia. Part of the reason, and an important part of the reason, is insufficient spending on education. This is a false economy. It's creating a learning crisis that has costs not only for the future ambitions of children, but also for the finances of governments. The annual cost of children in school who are not learning is $129 billion per year, or approximately 10% of global education spending. Just to clarify, this is because countries and donors are not spending enough. So if we take one example, which is representative of others, in Uganda, for example, the amount that the government spends is about $50 per child. But because only half of those children in school are learning, it's actually costing the government $100 per child to learn, to make sure a child is learning. Now, wouldn't it be better if we were already spending $100 for every child and making sure they were all learning? By contrast, Finland, of course a much richer country, is spending $10,000 per child and all those children are learning. In many countries, and including here in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's the poorest who are missing out the most. So you can see on this graph that no more than 1 in 5 poor children in Africa are reaching the last grade and learning the basics. In comparison, there's a wide gap between the richest. In some countries, as many as 80% in these same countries are learning the basics. Latin America, we can see a similar pattern. The poor quality of education is leaving a legacy of illiteracy amongst young people. Around 175 million young people are not able to even read a sentence. This is equivalent to around 1/4 of the youth population in developing countries. In Sub-Saharan Africa, it's about 40% of young people not able to read a sentence. Young people are worst affected of all, accounting for about 61% of those not able to read. Teachers are a vital part of the solution. This report identifies 4 strategies that policymakers have to juggle to provide the best teachers to reach all children with a good quality education. We've presented this illustration as a juggling act because we understand that it's not easy for policymakers to actually keep all the balls in the air. It not only takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of effort and political will to do so, but we can see examples, and many examples that we see in the report, of countries that have done so. The 4 strategies include recruiting the best teachers from a wide range of backgrounds, training all teachers well, allocating teachers effectively, and retaining teachers throughout their career by making sure that they have good working conditions and chances of promotion. The first strategy concerned the recruitment of sufficient teachers and also of the best candidates into the teaching profession. This is needed urgently to reduce class size. As we know, many classes we can see have more than 100 children in a classroom, very difficult for a teacher to be able to manage, as well as to expand access for those still remaining out of school. In addition to 3.7 million teachers needed to replace those who are leaving the profession, rather retiring due to ill health and so on. 1.6 million additional teachers are needed to achieve universal primary education, and 60% of those additional teachers are needed here in Africa. However, at current rates of recruitment, 29 countries won't even be able to fill their teaching gap by 2030. The first step to getting good teachers is to attract the most motivated candidates into the profession. It's not enough, however, just to want to teach. People should enter the profession having received a good education themselves. As we know, this is often difficult where teachers themselves have been the victims of a poor quality education. They need a sound knowledge of the subjects that they will be teaching and the ability to acquire the skills they need to teach. In countries with wide gender disparities, we need to make sure there's a good balance between male and female teachers, and more generally, that teachers from a diverse range of backgrounds, from different ethnic groups and language groups, for example, and teachers with disabilities are attracted into the profession. Teachers not only need to be recruited, but also to be trained. In 1 out of 3 countries, less than 3/4 of teachers are trained to national standards. This results in a gap between the number of pupils taught by a teacher compared to those taught by a trained teacher. So we can see here the bottom line, and those below the line have less than 40 students per teacher, but then when we look at it by trained teacher, we can see it zooms upwards to some of them having over 100 pupils per trained teacher. So a vast difference when you look at whether the teachers are trained or not. And we were hearing earlier about the efforts that Benin is making to make sure all teachers are not only in the classroom, but also trained. Policymakers, therefore, need to make sure that teachers receive good quality teacher education, both before they enter the classroom as well as once they're in the classroom. They need to be equipped to meet the needs of those from disadvantaged backgrounds through this training, including to teach in remote and under-resourced schools. The reality of the classroom is that many do not actually have resources. There's no point in training them to expect that. Teacher trainees should have classroom experience, and new teachers need support of mentors once they reach the classroom. Malawi is one example where teacher training institutes have provided ample time for school-based experience to help prepare teachers for the reality of teaching in remote areas. Training must not stop, however, once teachers are in the classroom. Teachers also need ongoing new ideas about how to support weak learners and deal with the challenges that they face when they're in the reality of the classroom. Teacher educators need training too. However, globally, the training of teacher educators has been ignored. This results in the fact that teacher educators themselves don't have the experience of the reality of the classroom that they need to impart to those candidates that they are training to make sure children are learning when these teachers get into school. Not only do we need to recruit the best teachers and train them, we also need to make sure that the best teachers are in the schools which have the most difficult circumstances. This is perhaps the ball that the policymakers are juggling that's one of the most difficult. How do you get teachers to areas where there's no hospitals, where there's no schools, good quality schools for their own children, where they have to travel a long way to get to make sure that they have access to basic facilities? But there are ways to do it. However, at the moment, we're facing big problems. Even with the teachers that are available, most of them are wanting to teach in urban areas where there are facilities. There's a real urban bias in the allocation of teachers. That there's a dearth of teachers from ethnic minorities and those speaking minority languages, and therefore able to help the students who are also from those backgrounds. There's an imbalance in the number of male and female teachers that varies around the world. Sometimes there's far more male teachers, and other times there's far more female teachers. And there's also some subjects that are commonly have too few teachers, so particularly maths and science. In Indonesia is one example that we show in the report, but there are many others. So we need to find ways to allocate teachers, the best teachers, to where they're most needed. One approach is to provide incentives to teachers, and again in the report we provide a number of examples. Not only do we need to get them to where they're needed and recruit them and make sure that they are in the classrooms, but we also need to make sure they're motivated once there. Salaries are one aspect of motivating teachers. They're by no means the only aspect. When one does surveys of teachers around the world, yes, salaries are important, but they often say there's many other things like good working conditions that are equally important. However, if you're being paid below the poverty line, you cannot expect a teacher to stay in the classroom and not have to take on another job, a phenomenon that we see in many parts of the world. In the report, we identify that there's at least 8 countries where teachers are being paid less than $10 a day. This is not enough for them to sustain themselves and feed their families. So as a starting point, all countries must offer salaries that are both sufficient to meet basic needs and are competitive with other professions. So in Latin American countries, for example, where teachers are relatively better paid, they are not as well paid as engineers or as lawyers and so on. So therefore, other professions are more attractive to go into. Teachers also need a good career path that will give them incentives to address diversity and support students at risk of not learning, so that their career promotion opportunities are partly based on this. Ghana has experience of this with its recent review of teacher management and development policy, where it is implementing such a reform. For these 4 strategies to be achieved, there is a need for teachers to be managed. I don't think that we can ignore the fact that there are problems in some countries and in some parts of the world, if not all countries and all parts of the world, where we witness problems of gender-based violence, where we witness teacher absenteeism, where we witness the fact that some teachers are actually not in the classroom teaching but are providing private tuition to their own students. This is not acceptable. It's obviously a minority of teachers, it's not all teachers, but we need to make sure that there's strong school leadership and strong government leadership to make sure this does not happen. Again, we show there are examples around the world of making this a reality. In parts of Africa, in Malawi and Zambia, for example, the governments are working together with teacher unions to come up with codes of conduct for gender misconduct. This has been shown to have some success. While banning private tuition is likely to be difficult, there are ways to make sure that teachers are not teaching the students that should be in their classroom, which undermines the possibility of learning for those who cannot afford private tuition. To be effective, teachers need the support of appropriate curricula and assessment strategies. It's not enough just to give teachers training and everything else. They actually need a supportive environment. They need to be given a curriculum that is offered at the right pace for children to learn, that makes sure that in the early grades students are provided with these foundation skills so we don't end up with 250 million children not learning the basics. It needs to be provided in relevant languages. It needs to empower students from disadvantaged backgrounds, getting rid of any stereotypes, including gender stereotypes. In countries with a large population of out-of-school children and youth, government and donors need to invest in second chance accelerated learning programs and equipped facilitators and teachers to teach in these programs to make sure these children have the chance to continue their education. Classroom-based assessment tools are also vital for teachers to have a tool to make sure they can easily and quickly identify where students are struggling and help to support them. Finally, successful implementation of reform requires governments to engage more closely with teachers. Teachers are often seen as part of the problem of poor learning, but they should be seen as part of the solution. It is crucial that teachers and teacher unions are engaged in the design, development and implementation of policies and reforms to improve the quality of education for all. Amasaganolu.
Je veux dire merci en éthiopien.
Thank you very much, Madam Pauline Rose. I don't know about you, but those numbers, they make me uncomfortable. You know, number of kids who are out of school, 57 million, on the eve of the expiry of the Millennium Development Goals in Africa. About 40% of young people, and a really simple sentence. I mean, we've not seen any progress in from 2000 to 20 to now in terms of enrollment in lower secondary school in Africa, because the progress is not caught up with our population growth. I mean, those numbers should prick everybody's conscience, and they should instill in us all a sense of urgency. And as a youth advocate, I always say that, you know, it makes me just want to hear more, and just want to see people do more. And I hope that that's the message we all take from this. We'll now turn to somebody who actually has a say in that. He comes from the African Union, and he's also my countryman, so it's a particular honor as well for me to welcome Dr. Mustafa Siddiqui Kaloko, who is the Commissioner for Social Affairs at the African Union. Commissioner, please.
Your Excellency Ato Demmeke Mekonnen, Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Mr. Nasiru Bako Afriri, representative of President Yai Boni from Benin, Ato Getachew Ngeda, Deputy Director General of UNESCO, and my colleagues on the podium, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin by conveying to this gathering the apologies of Her Excellency Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who was scheduled to be one of the speakers here this morning, but could not avail herself due to various official engagements during this period of the summit of the African Union. However, she sends her best wishes for a successful launch of the EFA Global Monitoring Report. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this program is extremely important to the African Union, as the approaching timeline of the Education for All program of 2015 coincides with the end date of Africa's collective continental plan of action for the second decade of education for Africa. Launching the current EFA report, therefore, affords us an opportunity to reflect on the current situation and future of education around the world in general, and Africa in particular. As we continue our year-long celebration of 50 years of African unity, our collective AU vision takes a special meaning, a meaning that underscores our potential to work together towards a united, peaceful, and prosperous Africa that demands the efforts of all in the development process that shape the present, define the future of the continent. It demands that our natural, social, and human capital be well accounted for and harnessed to the optimal. In that direction, education stands out as one of the most important tools at our disposal to achieve the present and future we want. Educational programs at local and global levels must therefore take into account a people's vision and context for it to be relevant, responsive, and meaningful. When the heads of state and government of the African Union declared the second decade of education for Africa in January 2006, it was with full recognition of the need to address the full spectrum of education. It also underlined the importance of education for personal empowerment, development, as well as for peace and prosperity of our continent. The plan of action for the second decade of education for Africa declares that all children must attain at least secondary level of education. It was realized at the time that to achieve the minimal Millennium Development Goals, basic education alone would not be enough for Africa. Hence, the plan of action listed areas of focus that include technical, vocational education and training, tertiary education, teacher development, and quality of education amongst the 7 priorities. The second decade plan of action also envisaged an education that does not only provide knowledge, but also imbues values and a positive worldview in which Africa is perceived in the hearts of the educated as a place of hope that demands the best of them, an education that imparts life skills and entrepreneurial wisdom that perceives opportunity with local and virtual environments. An education that enables us to connect the dots between today's reality and the vision of peace, prosperity, industrialization, and so on. And even more, an education that provokes the mind to break the barriers of limitation and see beyond today's need, the scientific mind that dares to push the frontiers of knowledge. The question then is, do we have such an education system? Indeed, what is the purpose of the African school for the student, for the parent, for the society, for the environment, for the governments, and for that matter, for Africa? How does the African school take cognizance of African realities and aspirations while making use of global vista? Many of these plans come to an end with goals still far out of sight. I suggest that the missing link in all this is that the potential for the African school in achieving these goals has not been well considered. There has been limited multi-sector conversation on the education we want for the future we desire. Even in higher education and research, where the links between education and industry, for example, are clearer, little has been done to entrench a culture of engagement between education and industry. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to note that the most recent UNESCO study has demonstrated that unlocking the transformative power of education requires at least a secondary level of education. The study further shows that tertiary level of education enables populations to appropriately manage their environment, as well as enhance racial and religious tolerance. Malnutrition and stunting would be much reduced if mothers had at least a secondary education, as would infant deaths from easily preventable diseases like diarrhea. Allow me to state that a key reason for not achieving some MDGs in Africa is the international community's reduced focus on secondary and tertiary education and skills development over the last few decades. As a result, we have inadequate numbers of doctors, nurses, engineers, teachers, and so on, all products of tertiary education. Furthermore, middle-level skills needed for industry have also not been adequately addressed. Africa's large youthful population is Africa's greatest asset, as long as they are imbued with 21st century skills, competencies, knowledge, and positive attitudes. Now, with all this, we are unlikely to reap this demographic dividend we've been talking about if we only concentrate on those levels of education. And this is actually what is one of the strengths of the African Union Vision 2063 that we currently having consultations on. Teacher development will also continue to be a key area of focus beyond 2015 in Africa. In educating towards our common African vision, the teacher assumes a pivotal role The availability and capacity of well-trained, motivated, and motivating teacher staff remains the single most difficult obstacle in science, mathematics, technology, education, and even where nations are prepared to put resources into capacity building. Both developing and developed countries are striving to enhance their science, math, technology education as a major input for industrialization and economic prosperity. However, this is hampered by a severe shortage of skilled and trained staff in these areas. The UNESCO study is extremely useful as it helps to validate the long-held African position concerning education development. These studies will form part of the basis that we need to carry out in-depth studies on the efficiency of our education system. The African Union Commission has spearheaded collective visioning and programming in education, science, and technology in the past decade. But now, there is need for some reflection and reorientation. Such reflection is going on in the development of the Pan-African University and has gone into the development of the new Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa 2024. These programs are seeking to ensure harmony amongst initiatives concerning development of human resources and intellectual capacity in all sectors and ensuring the right emphasis. As a concrete expression of the considered ideals in higher education and research, the African Union has established the Pan-African University to provide a reproducible example in quality and excellence for the African University. I am pleased to report that there has been much interest expressed by many African governments towards the Pan-African University. The current host countries, Nigeria, Kenya, Cameroon, and Algeria, have demonstrated ownership and are taking up leadership in ensuring that partnerships in support of the Pan-African University are aligned towards excellence and the common vision. We are making significant effort to ensure that support from partners is responsive to our articulated homegrown vision and in line with our priorities. We need to seek to influence the global agenda beyond 2015, since experience shows that globally set priorities influence development strategies in member states and determine the approach of partners. We know, for example, that international support for higher education was negatively affected by the fact that the global MDGs and Education for All goals address only basic education. Thus, our position is that higher education and skills development are essential in ensuring sustainable development. Allow me to thank UNESCO once more for inviting the African Union to this key event to strengthen the link between global programming and African visioning. This will enable the end-term evaluation of Education for All by African countries to take into account the homegrown plan of action of the second decade of Education for Africa. This is the only way we shall get a full picture of the African situation to form a scientific basis for the post-2015 program. It is my hope and expectation that through our partnership with UNESCO, the African position will fully influence the global post-2015 agenda. As we are building a strong collective position based on our common vision, it will be possible to achieve more in the period beyond 2015. I look forward to continued cordial and fruitful partnership between the African Union Commission, UNESCO, as well as with the rest of the UN community in education development to the Africa that we really want. I thank you for your attention.
Well, I was going to say thank you, Mr. Kaloko, since we speak the same language, but thank you very much, sir. We'll now pause.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most gracious. Your Excellencies, distinguished and honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak in front of you. There is a saying in our national language, Sheikh-e Maktab hai, ek imarat gar, iski sanat hai, ruh-e insani. This means that a teacher is like an architect who builds the soul and the character of a child. My name is Maryam Khalik, and I am a teacher from Swat Valley in Pakistan. I used to teach the schoolgirl Malala before she was so brutally attacked for carrying out her right to go to school. Teaching in rural and underdeveloped areas in Pakistan is very hard. I have experienced serious problems in education system which make it hard for the teachers in the same situation as me to provide a good quality education. Let me start by painting a picture of what conditions are like. The government spends hardly more than 2% of their GDP on education. It is reassuring to hear that they intend to double it in the coming years. More spending is vital as 5 million children are out of school. In Swat, where I work, there are some 2,000 schools. Most of these schools can be found in developed but populated areas. But I would say that they are not up to the standard of an equitable education system. In mountainous areas, where very few schools can be found, they are either ghost schools, the schools that are mentioned in black and white, and their existence is not apparent on land, or they are not operational at all, or there are schools with having no infrastructure, no system, no teaching learning process. The building also lacks proper facilities. The classrooms are not properly well equipped with desks and chairs, and I must say that in some schools there are no toilets. Let me tell you that it is very hard to teach and keep children's concentration when they have no chair to sit on and nothing to lean on to write. In short, we can call them schools just by name. These can only be described as abysmal learning conditions. Every child should be given appropriate care and attention by a teacher, which we totally lack in our schools. Yet, class sizes are out of control in some areas with one teacher for up to 150 students. In such cases, it becomes very difficult for a teacher to provide every child the attention they rightly so deserve. There is also a huge lack of qualified teachers. Once, when I visited my auntie's school, I found that English was being taught from grade 5. She asked me to write a few lines on myself and my village so that she may share it with the students. Honestly speaking, she didn't know how to write an essay in English. She was a teacher, and I think she was the head teacher. It meant that her students were totally relying on memorizing what they were told rather than actually learning. Our culture, women and girls are not given priority when it comes to education. They are not expected to work, and therefore they are left unnoticed and uneducated. This is unacceptable, and we must change it. I and Malala's father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, have been trying to change the attitude towards girl education in Swat by encouraging the parents to send their daughters. Once, when I was doing my bachelor's degree in education, it was compulsory that I would teach 40 lessons in a government school. During that time, I was surprised to know that the students couldn't differentiate between the sounds of P and F. They pronunciated the word frog like prog. Their pronunciation was very poor. For them, English seems to be attempting an English paper seems to be a tough battle. These children need to learn the basics in language they understand. And yet recently, I have come to know that our province has converted the Urdu medium schools into English medium schools, where many teachers are not proficient in English. The administration, the system, the government cannot only be blamed. Due to the lack of awareness, in some cases, parents are also not interested in their children's future. It is not only the duty of the government and the organization to ensure that each and every child should go to school and get education, but we have to ensure quality education because every child owns the right to attain equitable education. It is well said by a great scholar, a mediocre teacher tells, a good teacher explains, a superior teacher demonstrates, and the great teacher inspires. That's why I fully support the recommendations in the new Education for All Global Monitoring Report, and I stress on saying that if we invest more in teacher, if we train them properly, if we do the recruitment on merit level, then, only then, we can make the best use of the book, the pen, and the teacher. Only then we can achieve our objective for the millennium, that is teaching and learning equitable quality education for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Mariam Khalik, and thanks for sharing with us your inspirational story and for giving the world the inspiration that is Malala Yousafzai.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is great honor for me to be here in front of you today. I come from Malawi, where there is a learning crisis affecting the disadvantaged the most. Teachers are few and far between. Class sizes are enormous, and this has to change.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Federation of Ethiopia, the Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs in Benin, ESCO colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know about you, but I've listened over the last couple of hours to a situation, a big reality check that, we should be really angry about where we are in education 13 years later after Dakar. But on a bright note, I'd like to start off by saying, in the spirit of lifelong learning, I want to be like Chernobyl when I grow up. That's about our youth, and I think if we don't have some hope and we really see the energy here, in spite of it all, the leadership, given the advantages and the opportunities he has, this I think is what it's all about. The teaching and learning is so important. When this title came up from the GMR, after so many titles, I think it was absolutely right. It came of age. It's important for our children, for which we have failed over the decades, but it's even more important for our teachers, and we fail them as well. Governments have failed them, and I think this is a big acknowledgement of where we're at and where we need to be. So I'd like to acknowledge UNESCO and their courage to put this on the table and to really carry forward, especially Pauline and her team, bringing all that expertise, because the outreach they've had, this is a report not just of UNESCO, they really did reach out to teachers and to all those who have a responsibility of making this a reality. And I know that it is going to play an incredibly important role.
And also to thank all of you for joining us today for the launch of EFA's Global Monitoring Report here in Addis Ababa. Before we go, please, a few announcements. Thank you very much. The Deputy Prime Minister of Ethiopia will now leave us alongside the Honorable Foreign Minister of Benin and the African Union Commissioner.